do. I never did that.
Upper and a downer.
Yeah.
God, when I worked, lunch was Mountain Dew and Snickers.
Oh. Well, I have 130, and we have 17 members on this board, and half of that is 9, and we have 9 people here. So thank you all for attending. It's really great that we can get started on time rather than having to wait for somebody. We have we have one new individual here that I'd like to have Josh Frank introduce himself, tell a little bit about himself and who you represent.
Sure. So thank you for having me. My name is Josh Frank. I'm an urban designer and architect. I'm appointed by Commissioner Pat Kemp at Hillsborough County. And I also serve on the Ybor City Development Corporation board. So this is my second meeting this month. And just a little bit about myself. I'm a native of St. Pete. Grew up in northern Pinellas County. Moved over, went to USF, and started my own office after a few years at a previous office. So we do mostly public realm design, parks, plazas, bus stops, transit stations. I've had the pleasure to work on projects for University of Central Florida's new downtown campus, strategic property partners, you name it. So we've done a lot of really cool urban projects in the city of Tampa. And really transportation, mass transit is a passion of mine. It's something that I used. I have 2 master's degrees, one in architecture, one in urban and community design. My master's in urban and community design had a transit focus to it. So I'm very glad to sit on this board and look forward to hearing today's agenda and many more. So thank you.
Welcome. And Sarah, without an H,
Yes.
can you just review your background so we get you into our heads a little bit better?
Sure. I'm Sarah Calhoun. I'm a transportation engineer. I own a private consulting firm that does a lot of FDOT work. We mostly do ITS type work as well as traffic signal designs and studies, that kind of thing as well. Been doing this in the Tampa area for about 24 years now. So I'm involved in things like the Howard Franklin Bridge and some of those big projects that may be good or bad, but so yeah, that's.
Well, they'll be good if you're involved.
The technology will be good. We gotta see how it goes.
Okay. And then Kelly and Bob, would you introduce yourselves too?
Kelly Miller with Pasco County MPOCAC. I'm a community advocate on the west side of Pasco, and I have a not-for-profit organization called Empowering Pasco's Veterans.
Bob Witmer, at-large, appointed by Cliff Manuel from Hernando County, and was a planning and zoning commissioner, among other things, in my past life. Today I'm retired, and 5 o'clock is cocktail hour.
Going over to the other side, Rick.
Rick Richmond, CAC, Hillsborough County MPO.
And I'm Bill Roberts. I was an at-large appointee from TBARTA Commissioner Melanie Griffin from the Commercial Realtor team.
Karen Mullins for Pinellas CAC, activist.
Bob Henyon at large. I'm also on the Community Redevelopment Agency Advisory Committee for Dunedin, and as of last month, the Forward Pinellas CAC. My master's is in public administration, and I've been involved with transportation for a long time.
So,
Ed.
come out.
Is that the Calistoga wet wagons?
Pony Express.
Yeah.
And I'm Bill Johnson, and you honored me some time ago by selecting me as your chair of this group. I have experience being on the city council in Clearwater for 14 of the last 18 years. In between, I was on the TBARTA CAC, and then when I came off of the council because I was term limited, I got appointed here, and I guess I didn't learn enough the last time around because right now I'm in for very crazy, but very rewarding in that a lot of people are saying good things, making good suggestions, and I think there's an opportunity to work together there, and that's really what TBARTA is all about, working together for the region. So we will proceed with public comment. Persons wishing to address the board are requested to complete a comment card and will be limited to 3 minutes. Please see staff prior to the meeting. This public comment period will be extended for up to 30 minutes. Probably don't need it up to 30 minutes. Karen?
Is there anybody on the phone?
Oh, thank
Doesn't
you
appear
for pointing
so,
that out.
but
I know, I didn't hear
yeah,
anybody
I
chime
don't see
in.
anybody on the.
Is there anybody on the phone? No, thank you. So, do we have any public comment?
We're looking at you, yeah.
I'll just introduce myself. My name's Bradley George. I'm a reporter at WUSF. Transportation is one of the things I cover. I try to get out every week to go to different board meetings and things, and looking at what was on the calendar for this week, and saw this one. I've been meaning to come to a TBARTA board meeting, but the schedule conflicted with that. So I thought some of the items on the agenda here looked interesting, so I thought I would stop by and introduce myself and just learn a little bit more about what it is you do. Thank you.
You have a wonderful radio.
I know, I was gonna say that.
And how about going along the table on the side? Chris?
Chris DeNoxis, Senior Planner, TBARTA.
Jennifer Mendez, Executive Assistant, TBARTA.
Hi, I'm Cindy Raskin. I'm the Director of Commuter Services for TBARTA.
Brian Pissarro, Principal Planner, TBARTA.
I'm Chris Jadek, Director of Communications for TBARTA.
Good afternoon, Linda Crescentini. I'm Director of the Project Management Office with HART.
All right, great. Did we miss any? Yes, we did.
We're trying to hide. It's going on.
Scott Leo, WSP. Bill Baldwin, Bill Oliver. You'll see us plenty later.
All right. So the next item is the consent agenda, which is the CAC minutes. Are there any corrections to the minutes? Sarah, you commented on the MCORs, and we recommended a revision. The Pinellas facade was scheduled to be at the following TBARTA meeting, but did not show up. And as far as I know, they haven't taken any action on the proposed resolution.
We have not. In fact, the board voted that they did not want a presentation from the Florida Chamber, that they would prefer to have it directly from FDOT. So that's happening at this month's meeting.
Oh, okay, good. Is there a motion for approval of the minutes, or are there any corrections?
I was just, yeah, corrections. I don't think I was present at that meeting.
Not that you remember.
Huh?
Not that you remember.
Yeah, not that I remember. I think I was in New York.
Okay.
I move approval of the minutes.
Second.
All right, all in favor of the amended minutes, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Oh, opposed? The minutes stand approved. We will move right into our presentations and action items, and the first is a presentation on the Flamingo Fair Park.
Good afternoon again, Linda Crescentini. I'm Director of the Project Management Office for HART and interim project manager for this project. So I'm going to give a very high level of Flamingo Fairs and then ask me any questions that you need clarified. So exactly what is Flamingo and how does the fare system work? So Flamingo is the name brand for the electronic fare payment. It's a contactless smart card as well as a mobile app with a barcode. And it has the ability to integrate with various new ways to pay for fares. So as you can see there, one is the picture of the Flamingo card, next is the ability to use your smartphone for payment, and then open payment, which will come later this fall, will be to use Visa, MasterCard, Apple Watch, whatever other electronics you might have. So why did we start? We need to modernize our fare boxes. Our fare boxes are extremely old, they're outdated, they only take cash and the mag stripe. So this offers customers a more convenient way to pay, and it improves mobility, regional mobility, by one seamless system to pay across the Tampa Bay region, and we'll get a little more into that later. And it also helps us to collect better metrics on stops, not necessarily related to an individual, but just better metrics as to how our users need to use the system. And what makes Flamingo different than a lot of other card-based systems? Ours is an account-based system, and that's very important because you could do probably 5 times as much with an account-based system versus a card-based system. No data is stored on the rider's card, and all the rules and transactions are controlled by a configurable central system, meaning integration possibilities are limitless. The system can support such contactless as bank cards, fare capping, and I'll get into an example of that, auto loading, balance protection, and even possible integration with other mobile apps like Uber and Lyft. So one of the very best features is fare capping. And the best way to explain fare capping is we have a lot of customers who can't afford to buy a monthly pass. They just have to pay day to day. And by doing that, they don't reap the benefits of capping out at the month because there's no way to track their transactions. This will allow the users that once they hit the day pass limit, which for PST is $5, for Heart is $4, they ride for free for the rest of the day. And it's the same, once they hit the monthly cap for the month charge, which I think for us is day 17, they ride for the rest of the month for free. So I'm gonna try this, let's see if it allows me to do this. Or maybe we don't have audio. Looks like it's just muted.
It's muted at
Is
the
it muted?
bottom.
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry,
to the
sorry,
left
sorry.
side.
There we go.
When the YouTube's
The YouTube one is muted?
For the rest of that month. So keep tapping. While Flamingo Fares tapping saves you money.
It's a really short one. I'll do it again.
Do we have somebody joining us on the phone?
Flamingo Fares to save you money.
Yeah, Parish Ward.
Hi,
I go.
Take the equivalent of a day pass. Every ride after is absolutely free on that day. The more you ride, the better the benefits. So everyone gets the best fare. And when your trips reach the cost of a monthly pass, you earn unlimited rides for the rest of that month. So keep tapping. While Flamingo Fares tapping saves you money.
So that's one of the largest benefits for our patrons. One of the other things is we had talked about is that it's open architecture and it's account-based. So that allows us to add and subtract different applications as we need to moving forward. Everyone can manage their own account. We'll have personal accounts that are set up where you will constantly see whether you're using your mobile app. You'll be able to see what your balance is. You will be able to auto load. So if you dip below, if you're a consistent rider and you dip below a certain average, if you say, hey, by the time I hit $5, please put another 10 into my account. This way you don't have to constantly go back and add value. Who are our sister agencies? So we have Hernando, the bus, we have Hillsborough Us, Pasco, PCPT, Pinellas, which is for PSTA and the Jolly Trolley, and SCAT. So we get a lot of questions on how come this is taking so long. So just to give kind of a baseline comparison, We're similar in size to the Wave in Grand Rapids. It took them 3 years. The complexity to ours is that we have 5 regional partners. Not a lot of folks have done that over, it's usually a single entity, maybe there might be 2. Even some of the larger ones like Portland, it was Portland for rail and for bus, but they didn't have all the different fare structures from the different sister agencies to make sure that our rules are set up correctly. So we're right smack where we're supposed to be. We're supposed to take 3 to 5 years. Some of the larger ones are closer to 10, and we are currently, we're live right now. We're not really sharing that information with anybody, but the system is up and operational. So current status, we just completed deployment testing, and what deployment testing does is it's the load testing. So the testing confirmed that the production environment will perform as expected under heavy system use, and system redundancy is robust, which means if our system collapsed and burned and failed, we have a total redundant system that operates in the background. We just finished revenue testing, which was huge for us. That was a controlled environment where we had real money, but it was the use of transit staff to make sure that that testing, so it was kind of controlled. Right now, which started February 5th, is our public beta testing, and this is real people with real money. One of the things we're doing for that, we're trying to keep the amount of folks down between 500 and 1,000 for the region, but what it allows us to do is if there's any fatal flaw before we do a brand, a grand opening kind of and heavy marketing campaign, we quietly want to see and make sure that we've worked out all the bugs in the background. So we do have a promotional going around, and if anybody would like to sign up, I just need your email. But what that would allow you to do is the cards going forward, since it's an account-based system, you get your card, which you will register, and then that's your card for the next couple of years. And so there's a $3 fee for the first card that you get. We're waiving that fee, and we're adding $5 to your account once you sign up your account the next morning, or we say within 5 business days, but we're trying to do it daily. $5 will be added, and then you can just try the system out. So we have 2 different phases. Where we are right now, our contactless smart card is up and operational. Our mobile app is up and operational. Our consumer website is up and operational. Our back office is up and operational. And to purchase cards from transit stores is available. What's going to happen and full completion of the project will be later this summer, early fall. We'll have retail networks, so you'll be able to go into and don't hold me to the names I throw out there because I'm not sure who they've already have gotten contracts with, but like if you had a 7-Eleven or a CVS or a Publix and you go to their gift card section, the Flamingo Fair card will be on there. So we'll have retail stores, which helps our customers not necessarily have to come to a transit center. IVR, which is our automated phone system, will be fully up and operational, just like banks used to. You can call, check your balance, do anything like that, and that will be an automated system. Open payments, which I had mentioned before, which will be your Apple Pay or a credit card versus having the Flamingo card. And we'll have our social services websites up. So USF, for us, USF or Tampa, University of Tampa, they can add and delete students as they need to. They'll set up their account. Any other of the social services will all have their individual accounts. TBARTA will have their own individual accounts, and you can manage that how you see fit. And we'll also have a full-blown marketing campaign. Probably you'll start seeing that around May. So after the launch of everything, hopefully we only have a few minor items to clean up, but that will happen until probably the end of the year. So just to thank you while we're here, TBARTA did contribute to the success of our project. So just as a breakdown for state, federal, TBARTA, HART, and PSTA for the cost for the project right now is around $12 million. And just some of the terms you may hear is the Flamingo is the brand name for the regional partnership. In it is the primary contractor. They're the people that bring the e-fare technology to the table. Clever has been our consulting program management support, and they will both stay with us until the end. So that's all I had. Do you guys have any questions?
On that video, there was one little rule that it said underneath there. It said, trips must be, and I couldn't quite catch it. Is there a stipulation to that once you reach your limit for the day? Like on the
This
video.
fare capping for
Yeah, the
month
fare
has to be in the same transit system.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Is that
You're
what it was? I
exactly
missed-
right. You're
okay.
exactly right. So you can't cap out in Hillsborough and then come to PSDA because we have two different fare structures. So you would cap out in Pinellas and then you would cap out in Hillsborough. That's correct.
Okay. And then can we use the card that we have already been sent? Because some of us have been sent a Flamingo card from the past. Can we register that card? We have to get
No,
it.
those will no longer work.
Okay.
So, but please, if you would like one, just send me your email and I will gladly sign you up. But you'll need to go in and register that account. You'll put the
Kind of
same.
like a Sun Pass?
Exactly the same. And all they're doing is waiving the fees for now and just loading $5 on there for you to start using. Yes?
So in addition to the locations in retail offices and your offices, is there any plans for any additional physical purchase points? For example, you go to a metro station in DC, they've got the vending machines there that you can purchase a card right there, or in the airport or something like that. Is there any plans for additional locations at this time?
We are getting away from the ticket vending machines. We experienced a lot of issues with them. So if you want to do that, you could do the mobile app and not have to go somewhere. Otherwise, if you are here and you walk into a Walgreens, CVS, or Publix, whatever, you could pick a card up there. But if you are not near retail, you can easily just get online and create a mobile account.
Sure. I would just say that I hope that that's part of the marketing campaign to sort of bridge that awareness for folks that may be coming to the airport. Because, if I go to an airport in a city and I'm not familiar with their transit system, first thing I'll do is try and look for a vending machine for an Orca card or something like that. So.
Sure, that's a very good point, that our marketing folks need to be aware of that, because that's exactly what you do if you go someplace else, but yeah.
That's right.
I know MTA is trying to get away from the machines as well. My question is, per capita or percentage, what is our cost for this? We're seeing Portland, we're seeing Seattle. How much money are we spending? I said 12 million, but is it in direct correlation with these other programs?
No, those guys, their change orders are what the value of our contract are. They're spending much higher. I forget where it was. I want to say it was Boston. And they just added a $25 million change order to their system.
Wow.
It was ridiculous. So we are well under what the cost is for implementation. There's a couple of things, and those metrics have yet to be determined. This isn't going to just save us a ton of money, because from the perspective of fare capping alone, people that pay every day that income comes in, now that they're capped out, they're riding free for the last, week and a half or 2 weeks. That's lost revenue too. So we see a lot of costs that will be offset, or some areas where we can save, but it isn't necessarily, it's more for the convenience of the public than it is to save money.
Okay, thank you.
Quick question on the fare capping, because I think you presented this in the CAC
I did.
video, and there was a little bit of confusion. Is that something you have to enroll in, or is it automatic? If I buy a card, and I exceed the daily pass, I don't have to sign up for anything?
And one thing I want to explain a little bit further on that. So when I said there's benefits to registering, you do not. You can register as Daffy Duck if you'd like. You don't have to have an account. However, since it's an account-based system and your value is not on your card, if you lose your card and you have $50 balance on there, by registering your card, we will just transfer that money. You don't lose your balance. If you're not registered and you don't know your card number, there's no way for us to prove that that card is yours, so you will lose your $50. So if you choose not to register, you will still get the fair capping, you just won't have the balance protection.
But is it a feature that you actually have to enroll in, or is it
No,
automatic?
your fair capping will be okay. You have to enroll to get the balance protection. So, only because we have no way to, know who you really are, so. And just to follow up on that, the cards are tracked not by names, they're tracked by the card numbers. So all the data that we receive is all from the card numbers, not necessarily your personal information. Yes, sir?
You had made mention of people who are unable to buy, the poor who can't buy a monthly pass, and that this is compatible for them. How does that work with a lot of people who don't have bank accounts or credit cards and so forth? How well does it meet the needs of the poor?
So this gives them that protection as far as, if they load, okay, so there's two different things you're saying. One is if they don't have a banking account, they could still load cash at any of the transit centers if they choose to. Once we have the retail network and the 7-Elevens and the Circle K's set up, they can walk in with their card and add value at those locations. So if they only have $5 in their pocket, they can add value at that point in time. We just, since it's kind of a phased approach, we're not there yet. We're not there until the end of the summer. But
Okay.
it will
So all that
allow
means
them.
is that it's not automatic.
Right.
Right, if you do associate it with a credit card or a banking card, it will continue, if you put the auto reload on there, it will take $5 out at a time.
One
So
more
if that's
question.
what you want.
Manatee County's not included. Is there a why?
Okay, so Manatee was in the original group. Manatee did drop out because they went to a different type of structure. Theirs is not an account-based system. It's more the flash pass that we have today that we just, there's no, you don't get the benefits. You won't have the benefits of the fair capping. You won't have the benefits of the stored value. And, they chose at that point in time not to stay in.
So two quick ones. I've seen this presentation before, so I'm glad to keep seeing updated versions of it. But I believe you also mentioned at one point that Orlando was a potential with links. Is that something still sort of hopefully in the works?
And that's why we said it's totally reconfigurable. So right now, One Bus Away is on this.
Right.
So if you want to see real-time bus information, your Flamingo app will redirect you right to One Bus Away, so that's interactive. If Brightline or somebody else comes across and they say, hey, we want them as a partner, we can add them as a partner. It's just a matter of, changing some of the business rules.
Okay, and one other quick question. Is part of this going to be, you said improved metrics, will you be able to have origin and destination? Is it a tap on to get on and tap on to get off?
It's only tap on, we are not doing tap off.
Okay.
So we will be able to tell patterns.
Sure.
You'll be able to see in the morning at 7 o'clock, so many people got on, and then in the evening but since we don't have tap off, we won't have specifics.
Can I recognize myself here for
Sure.
a minute? But PSTA, I know, has contracts with some of the major employers or with St. Pete College. Does this facilitate that, or is that handled separately?
Absolutely. This will, when we have the institutional website up and operational later this summer, this will allow St. Pete College, because the students come in and then you get a different group for the spring semester and the fall semester. So this will allow them to add their students and delete their students as they need to versus PSTA doing that. But it will be fully in the control of St. Pete College to control their own usage. But yes, absolutely.
Their school ID will be?
It can be, if they choose to. We are changing all of our employee badges, so to make it easier for the operator, because right now there's several different people that can ride at different fares. And if we standardize it with the same card, then, you know, our operators say, yep, I recognize that, and it'll simplify things for them. So if St. Pete College chooses to do that and have all the students' IDs to be Flamingo cards, they can absolutely do that.
Bob, I think was next.
Just real quickly, and you may have touched on it and I may have missed it earlier, but I represent the Tampa Airport, and so are there plans in the works to make the cards available at the airport and the cruise ports and those types of tourist entry points in the region?
Yeah, they haven't started all those conversations yet. It can happen. Some people had also asked about a convention, you know, or the Super Bowl's in town. It's certain packages when they get to town. And we had talked about, rather than them having a card, if they had the mobile app, you know, we could kind of adopt to whatever's requested. But we're focusing on just getting it up and operational, but yes, that's an excellent point. Both the port and airport should be involved as we grow.
Good. Thanks.
Yes, ma'am.
The mobile app, it has location tracking. What is done with that data?
No, we do not track we track the fares and we can manage those accounts, but we don't track where you go with the mobile app. We track it from the bus perspective as to where you log in at.
Okay.
But we're not tracking your phone.
You're not tracking, okay.
Just when you present that to the validator on the bus, then it says, you know,
That
card.
and one bus away.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Other questions? I'm just so thrilled.
That's cool.
This has been in the works for a while.
I know.
But it seems like it's really oriented to the user.
Yes.
And too often, we in the transit world come up with cool things that are because they're cool instead of because they really help the user.
Right.
So, wow.
Yeah, that's
Okay,
good.
I mentioned to, that I was in the process of signing on this morning and then I got sidetracked, but.
Yes, please, if you want to, we would love to have people that are testers that, yeah, if you send me, if whoever has the sign-in or at the end of the day,
Send all of
if
us.
you have your emails, just send me the list for the emails and I'll get everybody.
You have to ride, though.
Yeah, we're
Oh,
hoping
I
that you-
ride.
We're hoping that you ride. So, thank you guys, I appreciate it.
Thank you for coming over.
Sure.
All right, next subject is Regional Transit Development Plan, the distinguished gentleman, Bill Ball.
I'm happy with just gentlemen. Well, good afternoon. Good to be back to the CAC today. Here to give you an update on Envision 2030, the Regional Transit Development Plan. And here's what we want to focus on today. The timing of your committee meetings has changed a little bit what we would present versus when we go to the board. So we're going to present as much as we can today, and then we're going to have a lot more for you when you come back and meet again in April. Okay, so we want to focus on the board workshop that we held back in November. We facilitated, and we've since presented the results of what we heard from the board at their January board meeting, which was down in Manatee County. And so I'm going to share the high-level results of what we heard from the board and how we're using that in the Envision 2030. And then I want to talk about, and this is where we, if the committee's comfortable today, we would like the committee to take an action on the Transit Vision Network that we talk about today. I'm going to go through, based on the direction of how we define regional transit, what we're considering to be that regional transit vision network. And if the CAC is comfortable, we would love you to endorse that network later in the meeting today. So here's where we are. These are the milestones throughout the project. You can see the ones we've checked off at this point. Right now, we're coming down the home stretch and putting together the final plan, the final priorities, the final 10-year implementation plan, and that's going on as we speak. We're working closely with staff on that, getting a draft to them later this month that we will then present to the board as a draft plan in March, and I'll talk more about the schedule toward the end of the presentation. So to the board workshop, we had 3 key goals that we focused on at this board workshop. Number 1 was we wanted to reinforce TBARTA's purpose, goals, and guiding principles, and we were able to do that. There were no changes really, they just reinforced what they had already adopted in the past. Secondly, we wanted them to discuss and buy off on how we define regional transit. There is guidance from the TBARTA Act in the legislation, and we used that as a starting point, so we got confirmation from them, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then finally, we got high-level direction from the board in 4 major areas to determine what the future roles of TBARTA should be moving forward based on the mission that they have now in transit. And those areas are regional transit planning, funding, operations, and branding. So what I'll share with you today is a little bit about what the board directed us in terms of their direction in each of these 4 areas. So the first item is defining regional transit and how we put together that regional transit network. It's pretty clear in the TBARTA Act that it's any transit project that crosses county lines, or it can also be a project if it's a phase of a project that would ultimately cross county lines, basically. And we definitely got agreement and consensus from the board on that overarching definition. They did add a couple of other items to help us understand how we apply that definition. First of all, you'll see this throughout the presentation, is that they wanted to emphasize increased coordination with the counties and the cities throughout the 5-county area, more so than it has been in the past. And then the final item was the focus of TBARTA's efforts should be on regional commuters as a number 1 priority. Doesn't mean others could also use the services that are ultimately provided, but the number 1 priority should be regional commuters. And that the services that are provided should be of a more premium nature, which you'll see in the definition that we talk about as well. So if you'll remember, if you were at previous meetings with the CAC, we talked about this peer review that we did looking at regional transit entities around the country. It's from that we identified these 4 key areas that we needed to do a better job of defining what TBARTA's role was going to be in each of those areas. And again, those are planning, operations, funding, and branding. So I've got a slide on each one of those areas to tell you what we heard from the board in terms of how we integrate that in the Envision 2030 plan. Well, planning, this one was straightforward because this is really the role that TBARTA is already playing. They're the ones that first to do a regional transit development plan for the Tampa Bay area. They're leading the regional transit planning today, and that's been the focus of what they've been doing. They're leading the regional rapid transit PD&E that Scott will talk about in a moment. And their vision is to continue leading that effort and then just expanding that as they expand their role in regional transit operations. So that one was pretty straightforward. Operations actually was also very straightforward. Their conclusion was that it didn't make sense to hire a staff, buy a bunch of vehicles, maintain them themselves. It makes more sense for TBARTA to play the role of funding and implementing services and then contracting those services to private or public entities that are already operating services in the area and taking advantage of the infrastructure that's already in place. So their guidance was we would focus on contracting services that are funded and implemented. We also talked about the potential for a need for regional transportation disadvantage services. And if you're not familiar with those, it's basically the door-to-door service for older adults and for those with disabilities that need more door-to-door type of service rather than the fixed route transit services. So we are discussing with the local entities whether that regional need is being met or not. We haven't determined that yet, but it's something that TBARTA is charged with determining whether they need to fill a gap that's not being currently met in terms of providing longer distance transportation disadvantaged trips across county lines. If there is a need, then that should be part of TBARTA's role as well. And then also to establish standards for any regional services that are funded and implemented by TBARTA. Funding, this is the toughest one, the most challenging one, the one we spent the most time talking about at the board workshop. We talked about the needs in 2 specific areas. The first one being the day-to-day operations of the agency, and then the second one being actually funding and implementing regional transit projects, which would be the more substantial funding that's necessary to make that happen. So we got 4 key directions from the board, and I'll go through each one of these because they're very important to lead to the last one. Number 1, TBARTA needs to become a designated recipient for federal funding. Right now, they are not in place to receive direct funding from the Federal Transit Administration. They have now made that application, and that work is in the process, and I guess it's hopeful that they'll get that in place later this year. The second one relates to, and this comes up time and again when we've done our one-on-ones, when we've done our with members of the board, with commissioners in the region, we've got to do a better job of defining what value TBARTA brings to each of the counties and to the region as a whole today, and what we potentially can provide in terms of value in the future as the role of TBARTA is increased. So clearly, I'll talk more about that in the presentation later. The third one, again, ties back to that communication and coordination, and we've got to do a better job of regularly communicating with the counties and the cities throughout the region before we get to the next one, which is the bottom line, is we have to find some dedicated and sustainable funding sources for TBARTA. So what I did with the board, and I'll do with you today, is I just identified a few of the potential funding sources that we're including in scenarios in Envision 2030, and talking about the things that would need to be done to start making these potential funding sources happen. Okay, so the first one we have here, currently the counties are contributing on a voluntary basis based on the population proportion of the region. At some point, it's going to be clear that a discussion will have to occur that would have to be a required contribution. More and more, TBARTA is going to be in a position where they're going to be able to get some grants from the state and federal government, and it's going to require a local match. We're going to have a mechanism to match those grants. And that goes back to demonstrating the value of TBARTA. What's the return on investment that each of the counties will receive if they invest in the regional focus on transit? And then agreeing to the specific allocation and signing interlocal agreements to move forward with that. The next one here, again, all of these are potential sources that we're outlining for consideration by the board as they move forward. The second one is a permanent state appropriation. Right now, it's very difficult for TBARTA. They're going to the legislative delegation and requesting an earmark on an annual basis. It's not a very stable process of funding an agency over any extended period of time. So there has to be the opportunity to pursue legislative change that would make that a permanent funding arrangement so that TBARTA can plan more successfully over time. Another potential source that becomes about as a result of Envision 2030 being adopted and submitted to the Florida DOT is the state block grant for transit. The process for doing that starts with the TDP itself, and if you were to submit that, we're eligible in the current year, that would have amounted to about $235,000 with the services that are currently provided by TBARTA. It does require a local match, dollar for dollar, so that we would have to come up with another $235,000 locally to match those dollars. So this is a funding source that we need to explore as this TDP is submitted to Florida DOT. Next one, state statutory funding. There is precedent for this because both Tri-Rail in South Florida and Sunrail in the Orlando area have received this statutory funding. The challenge here is that it's specifically identified in Florida statutes as only for commuter rail. So if TBARTA were to pursue something other than commuter rail, there would be a legislative change required to allow this type of funding to be assigned for services in the Tampa Bay area. Next one there, Florida Commission for the Transportation Disadvantaged. If it is determined that TBARTA will fill a niche for regional TD services, that is a possibility for obtaining funding to support those door-to-door paratransit trips. We've also identified public-private partnerships. That becomes more of an option when we implement a major transit capital project like regional rapid transit, where you have major stations along that corridor where you might have development opportunities around those stations. And those would be good opportunities for those public-private partnerships. Other potential sources, we'll mention the sales taxes here. What we mention it is just something for the board to think about, that each county within the TBARTA area has the ability to pursue a sales tax. TBARTA would have to negotiate with the county the possibility of having some of that set aside for regional transit services. Again, that ties back to building a local funding source that would allow you to leverage and match state and federal funding. Finally, the regional sales tax is not an option today. TBARTA does not have taxing authority today, nor is there a mechanism in the state statutes that allows for a regional sales tax today. The reason we bring that up, because that's a common source of funding with some of the regional transit entities around the country and how they fund their systems in other parts of the nation. Something that would, again, require legislative change if TBARTA were to pursue that option. So again, these are just a number of options. This is by no means an exhaustive list, and we're identifying them in the plan as we speak. Again, a number of options that the board can consider moving forward. The fourth item that we discussed with the board was branding, because what we've seen around the country is there's 3 different approaches to how you brand regional transit. One of those is a completely unified branding, where all transit services, local and regional, are branded the same. Second, you might have a co-brand, where regional transit services have both the local brand and a regional brand on it. And then the separate branding is another option, where regional is branded separately from local. And I'll show examples of each of these in the next few slides. What we heard from the board is their ultimate vision was that the customer would have a seamless experience, that they wouldn't realize even that they were on different transit systems as they moved throughout the region. So in their minds, the ideal vision would be a unified regional transit brand, recognizing that would be very challenging in the near term. They also believe that in the near term, it's more likely that we would have some sort of co-brand for any regional services that were funded and implemented by TBARTA. Now, it can work in any of the ways. I'll give you 3 examples here. In Seattle, they have a separate branding. Their regional services are branded Sound Transit. Their local services are branded differently, and it works just fine. And in fact, what makes it work is a good regional fare system that allows people to use all of those services and transfer from one system to another without it being an inconvenience to the customer. In Atlanta, their ultimate vision was a unified brand, is a unified brand as well, but they also recognize more of a transitional process over many years, and that in the near term, as an example in this photo, recent purchase by the ATL of some vehicles for MARTA also has the ATL brand on it as well. So you can see that it was a regionally funded bus and project. Phoenix is the example of a unified brand where the regional services are branded Valley Metro, and all the local services are branded Valley Metro. Even though there are multiple local operators of transit, they're all branded Valley Metro, which works well in the Phoenix region. So there's many ways to do it, and we have direction from the board of what their ultimate vision is, and also direction for the short term. So when we go through all of this, something we heard over and over again is doing a better job of communicating what value that TBARTA can provide to the region and each of the counties in the region. And what I wanted to focus on is why TBARTA, why regional transit, and something that was just published recently by the Tampa Bay Partnership does a good job of showing how this region compares in terms of competitiveness with other regions around the country. Now, what the partnership leads on an annual basis now is they look at a series of performance measures for 20 regions around the country, with Tampa Bay being one of those 20 regions. And by then, we can compare how we're doing from a regional competitiveness standpoint. And we pulled some of those measures to show you why we need to work harder, and TBARTA is part of the solution to tackle some of these challenges. If you look at this particular table, the first line in this table is Tampa Bay, and it shows you the ranking of where we are in each of these measures compared to the other 19 regional areas around the country. For example, in terms of transit ridership per capita, we're last among those 20 regions. In terms of the amount of service provided per capita, we are in last. Almost approaching last in bicycle and pedestrian safety. We do a little better in some of these other measures. Bottom line is we've got to do a lot better to work towards improving our regional competitiveness with other regions around the country. I've included some of the others, not all 19, but these are the 6 other communities that we looked at as part of our peer review. The good thing is that our peers were also in the Tampa Bay Partnerships work as well. I'll go to a couple of more measures, and it ties back to affordability, and that's the cost of housing and the cost of transportation. Again, unfortunately, Tampa Bay is near the bottom in each of these measures as well, and TBARTA, in moving towards their mission of providing regional transit services, is one way of trying to tackle this challenge in a more effective way. So that really sets the stage for helping to define what value TBARTA brings today. And then the next slide, I'm going to talk about if we're able to do what we put in Vision 2030, what we can potentially see value in the future for TBARTA. So these are the ones that we identified today, and initially the biggest value is having an entity focusing on regional transit. Because historically, we have 5 local transit providers. Their priority is local transit service and not providing regional connectivity via transit. So we now have an entity that's responsible for that regional focus and putting together the regional vision that I'll share with you in a moment. Bottom line, it's the first ever regional transit development plan. They provide commuter services that are available to this region today. So we have made progress in terms of what value we bring today, but the real value is what we have the potential to bring in the future. And that's this slide. And the bottom line is providing regional mobility options beyond the automobile that improve the quality of life, that enhance economic development, that improve job access for businesses coming to the area, as well as employees to have more job opportunities throughout the region. The bottom line is better regional connectivity through transit options. And so the value in the future is what's going to be the game changer to help us be more competitive with other regions around the country. So what are the keys to TBARTA's success in the near term? And it's all about getting the support we need to make it happen. Number one is we got to have that sustained commitment from the TBARTA board members and the county. So we need the commissioners at the county level and all of the TBARTA board members to be sustained commitment. Secondly, we've got to have proactive champions. So what we're working on with staff now is who are the logical champions that we need to identify at the regional level and at the state delegation level in order for us to move forward, especially at the funding level side of things. We've got to have these champions be in place to help us make it happen. And then finally, it's the support of the business community. It's really an economic argument based on the regional competitiveness issues that I just talked about. And having the Tampa Bay Partnerships and the chambers throughout the 5-county region get on board with what TBARTA's mission is all about will set us in the right direction. So that's where I wanted to cover in terms of what we covered with the board at the workshop. The rest of the presentation is focusing on where we are with the regional transit vision itself. And this ties back to the definition that the board agreed to. So what we're putting on this map basically follows through with that definition for regional transit. What I have is a series of layers that I'll show, and this first set of layers is what we're proposing would be TBARTA's responsibility based on the definition of regional transit that we just talked about. So this first part of this map shows the regional rapid transit. I think you're familiar with the 41-mile corridor that's being evaluated today. Scott will talk more about giving you an update on that next. But that's that from Wesley Chapel to downtown Tampa, to West Shore, to Gateway, down to downtown St. Pete. We also have the 5 intermodal centers that are being evaluated and funded by the Florida DOT that are along that corridor. So that would be part of the regional vision as well, again, under TBARTA's responsibility. There's other regional rapid transit opportunities beyond the one we're currently looking at. The main one we're talking about here is on the Selman across the Gandy, and that would be the next vision out there in the future in terms of regional rapid transit. That's the green line on this map. And if we add the rail transit corridor network, we're not identifying specific projects in the 10-year plan, but the opportunities are there on that rail network, and they're all regional in nature because pursuing any rail project would necessitate a regional discussion about the CSX corridors. The next one is the passenger ferry services. You're familiar with the seasonal one that's happening now between downtown Tampa and downtown St. Pete. There's evaluations underway for a connection between South Hillsborough County and McDill. You see that on the map as well. And in our discussions with Manatee County, there's interest in looking at a connection between Palmetto up to downtown St. Pete as well. Excuse me. So all of those are reflected on this map as well. And then finally, express buses, and this is where we reached the far parts of the region in terms of providing express bus service connections up through Hernando, all the way through all 5 counties. And this is the vision of the regional network we have for TBARTA's responsibility. Now, when we did all of this, it's very obvious that when you look at some of the services that are under the local responsibility and they're operating today, there is a lot of service that's important to the regional network, but it's under the local responsibility. So I want to talk about that briefly. So I'm going to switch from the TBARTA responsibility network to the local, and these dashed black lines are existing services that are regionally significant. We also have proposed services that are regionally significant. So all of those black routes are important to the regional network, but they're local agency responsibility. And TBARTA would be in a position to perhaps resolution of support and perhaps even help some of the local agencies fund this in the future, depending on funding issues. But they would still be under local agency responsibility. But in the end, when we have a regional transit vision network, and this includes everything, the part that I identified as TBARTA responsibility and the part identified as local agency responsibility. The only thing that's in addition here now is we also identify the Regional Rapid Transit Project having future extensions that go further into Pasco up to 52, further into Manatee, and potentially even down to Sarasota County. So this is the Regional Transit Vision Network that we have come to this point, which has been through basically over the last year, working with the committees, working with each of the individual transit agencies, working with the board members. This is the vision network that we're proposing to include in the draft plan that we take to the board next month. I just have a couple of slides to wrap up, and then if you have questions specifically about the vision, because that's the action item we're looking for today, if the committee's ready to do that. What I did want to mention, there's something that I've talked to Scott about this, talked to a number of the staffs at MPOs and the transit agencies, and there's a number of major transit projects that are going on simultaneously around the region. So we thought TBARTA could play a role in this Envision 2030 plan to help identify what those major projects are moving forward, either major planning efforts or project development, putting them on one map, putting them in one Gantt chart to give you an idea of where each of those are. Because these are major transit capital projects that are being evaluated today and at different levels of progress. So this includes the Regional Rapid Transit. It includes the ferry services, and it also includes Central Avenue BRT, a local agency responsibility. It includes Florida Avenue BRT, and it includes the Tico streetcar extension, as well as the intermodal centers along the Regional Rapid Transit Corridor. So we thought this would be an important thing that TBARTA could maintain over time to show where the status of these major transit capital projects. And just as important is where they're at in their development. So this gives you a good sense of what's local, what we're saying is more regional, and the status of where they are in the process. And you can see that the Central Avenue BRT, that orange bar, it's furthest along. It's approaching 100% design. And then the next one is the Regional Rapid Transit and the Tico streetcar in terms of the steps that you take for planning and development of those projects. So I think this is something that TBARTA will have in this Envision 2030 plan, and something they should maintain going forward so that everybody can understand the status of these major projects throughout the region and how they relate to each other in their development process. So what's next? We're wrapping up in the next couple of weeks the full draft plan, working with staff on that so that we can present to the board in March, that draft plan. At that March 20th board meeting, we'll open up a 30-day public comment period to provide additional public outreach time to get feedback on that draft plan and give us a little time to integrate any of the changes that come about from that into what we ask the board to adopt in May. So with that, I'll be glad to answer any questions, and I can go back to that vision map too if you have specific questions about it.
Let me just start off by defining what you said at the very beginning that you were trying to get out of us today.
If you are comfortable today, we would love to get endorsement of this regional transit vision network.
Questions from
Yeah.
members?
Several points, several times during your presentation, you mentioned legislative. Who are our champions or at the state level that are working for us? I think I know the answer, but I want to hear.
Well, I mean, now's the time for some of that, but the leadership is changing too. So we have a number of folks that we're working with today. I don't, who you have in mind, by the way. I'd love to hear that.
Just the guys from around here, and I completely went blank.
Galvano, Sprouse, and Simpson.
Right, well, see, Galvano has been a champion to where TBARTA is today. We just don't have him as much longer as we would like to have him. So what we're working on now is who's going to be our next champion, basically.
The other thing I like about the competitive, I'm a big believer in metrics, because you can show progress by showing numbers. So if you can quantify those competitive numbers,
Okay,
year
we
by
absolutely
year.
have that information. It's
Yeah.
just a lot of data. And we can, if you haven't seen that, we can provide that full report to the committee as well from the
Okay.
partnership.
Yeah, and even you can see Hernando at the top. I mean, all we got is 3 bus routes, and, well, we got to get that rail up from Wesley Chapel.
Well, it does show the rail network
Yeah.
up there, just a matter of when.
Otherwise, I buy into that.
Yes.
I have an area of concern, and I spoke about it at the last board meeting down in Manatee County as an individual citizen, because we hadn't really acted on it. My concern is what I've seen from several of our board, 2 of our board members, as indications that our partnership may be sort of shaky. We have to be careful that we provide, like Bob was saying, services to the extremities, like Hernando and Manatee County. At the November meeting over at TIA, November board meeting, Commissioner Reggie Bellamy from Manatee made reference to the idea of not feeling secure about the investment versus cost benefit for his county, Manatee. And this is quite understandable. It's very easy for a partnership to fall apart if everyone doesn't get something, or they don't realize that there's something coming from them in the future. The same was referred to in the December board meeting by Commissioner Janet Long, who actually said Manatee was thinking of withdrawing. I think we have to be very sensitive to this. We're going to have a system here that the hub, which is pretty much where TIA is, we're going to see things happening around there. And it's going to be very difficult for us to make sure that we all realize that we may not be getting something today, but as a whole, it will all come together in the end. So I think that that's something we just have to keep in mind. And you mentioned that as sustained commitment under your key items there for partner counties.
Well, I can say a couple of things in reaction to your comments. David Green and I did go, in response to Commissioner Bellamy's comments, we did go down and have one-on-ones with each of the Manatee County commissioners as a starting point to give them a better sense of TBARTA and what we're doing with Envision 2030. One of the things that came out of those discussions, we've added to this vision map, including that potential future, looking at that ferry service connection to Palmetto, and then also the future extension of the regional rapid transit that goes out towards Lakewood Ranch and then down 75, continuing on what we're talking about starting here in the other counties. So we have made a concerted effort to get them more included in that discussion. The other thing is when we put together the draft plan that you'll see in the next few weeks, we have prioritized short-term improvements and long-term improvements. And we're making every effort to provide some priorities that reach each of the counties in both the short-term and the long-term. We got to use some judgment there because we obviously want to make really our best investments that we can make when we get funding. But we also want to have projects lined up that provide opportunities for each county within TBARTA that make sense when the timing's right in the short term and the long term. So they're not waiting forever for that, for getting some of those services.
Good, because it's just very easy for people to say, I'm not getting anything out of it, and not realize it's a long-term plan. We saw that happen with Greenlight Pinellas. The people in the north part of Pinellas County felt they were not getting anything, only the South County, so they didn't.
Which was true.
They didn't support. They weren't.
Yeah, they weren't getting anything.
But you have to make sure that people realize that they're part of the whole.
So I guess this is maybe sort of a follow-up to that, is what framework are you looking to prioritize some of these moving forward? I know on your last slide you had it as a major next step, is that you're going to start looking at prioritizing these and how they fall into what's more actionable, what's sort of back burner type stuff. So just wondering, do you have a framework for that? What metrics are you using? Cost-benefit analysis, those sort of things?
Yeah, we have a technical evaluation process that we're using to prioritize projects, and then we're putting together essentially 3 revenue scenarios. One is more status quo, so we're not be able to do a lot. We can't go very far down the list. One is, these are higher probability revenue scenarios that we could do a little bit more with. And then one, if we get the revenue we need, this is what we would do. Since we don't have a robust funding plan in place, we're going to have to do scenarios to show what we would do depending on how much revenue we're able to achieve.
So I think that last scenario of showing what the permanent revenue is going to look like and what that revenue provides in terms of the service is critical to some of what.
Yeah, I think so, because again, what we're showing here is the vision.
Right.
This is well beyond the next 10 years.
Right.
And what we're putting together now is what could we fund in those scenarios within the next 10 years?
So
backing off of this vision.
I just had a quick little follow-up on that, was how does this process, because I'm new here, how does this process sort of align with elements like the LRTP that's happening in Hillsborough County, Pinellas County, or something like that?
Yeah, throughout the last year, we've coordinated with the MPOs and the local transit agencies and their local TDPs to do our best to make sure they're aligned.
Mm-hmm.
There are always going to be some issues, so it's going to be some going back and forth as we go. So when we're done, we will have to go out and present to each of those again, and making sure there's that feedback loop to make sure we're on the same page going forward. But the effort has been made to make sure they're consistent going in. We're making some tweaks that we'll hope will go feedback into their long-range plans and their local TDPs as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Bill?
Thanks, Bill. This was great. I mean, I've been waiting for somebody to give us the overview. Now the overview is overwhelming. So, and I could make a number of comments, but let me make a suggestion about the mission of TBARTA, because that's where you started out. I did not hear you mention an emphasis on public-private partnerships. And I think that's an area where TBARTA may have the greatest opportunity. I mean, there are a lot of things it needs to do. But, for example, the TBARTA board might very well suggest that TBARTA acquire the necessary rights-of-way to implement the various paths for some of these transit options. In that way, they could be a true contributor, and that's a capital issue, I understand. But that issue is more easily addressed, we've found, than operational issues. So I would throw that one into the mix as a possibility.
The one area I did mention for public-private partnerships was related to station area development opportunities when they do implement a major transit capital project like regional rapid transit. I did mention that one, but it goes well beyond that too.
Yeah, I mean, and I understand those, and I think those are good opportunities. Those are transit-oriented opportunities, and I'm a commercial realtor, so I get that part of it. But I'm going to go back to Bob Hinyon's comment earlier. I think the recommendation that you included on communicating the value of TBARTA to the various communities is probably in the top 3 of the mission, because a couple of us sit on county boards. In fact, all of us probably sit on county boards, and we hear that many of our elected officials just don't see the value, and that's what's made TBARTA difficult to fund. And so it's going to have to rely more and more on state funding. So I'll stop there.
Agree, and in fact, we're presenting to the Hernando Citrus MPO tomorrow. We're trying to move in that direction, get more education about what we're talking about here. I'm going to talk about these same challenges for regional competitiveness and the values with that MPO.
Good job. Thank you.
Karen, and then I want to get mine.
I'm going to bounce on the state funding. The legislation that you're asking, that Sunrail's running on rail and down in Miami-Dade, that language is going to have to be real specific. Otherwise, you open up a Pandora's box for anybody to grab that money. So are we looking for just BRT changing to include BRT, or are we looking for something else?
I think at this point, we're putting options in front of the board, and the board's direction will determine which ones they want to pursue that require legislative change. And that may not be the one. There might be one of the other ones that we talked about. But if they wanted to pursue statutory funding, there would require specific legislative change away from it being specific to commuter or intercity rail is what the language says. So I don't have a specific recommendation, but perhaps it would be specific to TBARTA if that's the route the board decided to take.
Can I go back to the keys to TBARTA success? There were 3 listed. The one that wasn't listed, or maybe it's hidden, is grassroots support.
Okay.
And I know that fella Alan Wolken, who helped with the Phoenix rollout, emphasized that, and that was something we really didn't do very well in Greenlight, to communicate how this changes people's lives and how by changing those lives, it will affect our lives. And it gets back to why should the counties fund TBARTA? So that was one of the things that I was
Okay, I like that one.
highlighting. Seems like there was another one that I lost. But
One of the things that we're working on that's fairly recent is putting together a video for Envision 2030, similar to what the team did for regional rapid transit, that concept, but more broadly based for Envision 2030, which will help with that education process and the communication of the values that TBARTA brings. And perhaps, I know you mentioned this in the past, Bill, was some of those might include some of those testimonials from people that would impact their lives if we had a more robust regional transit network.
So, Bill, could you go back to that map?
The map?
Yeah, my question is a little bit concerning between Pinellas and Pasco there, where you're up to 19. I'm having a hard time seeing that. It says proposed regional significant route that goes up East Lake, down Keystone, up US 19 in a dotted line, and then connects with 54. Now, I've seen some other plans where it goes completely up East Lake Road and connects onto 54. Is this now been changed to 2030? Do you understand where I'm looking at?
I mean, as in the MPO's long-range plan, or in Pasco?
Yeah, I mean, because that's Pasco and Pinellas, and I know for a while there we
can
had been
double check that.
talking-
I thought we had this consistent, but I will double check to make sure it is.
Because it's really important, I feel, that continuous loop does not go out onto US 19 in some form of transit, because you're just looking for timing issues at that point, connection issues that, are really going to be crucial to making the whole system work. And I don't understand what the disconnect is on why the northern part of Pinellas County will not allow the buses to go up to the county line. And from what I understand, that's where the disconnect is at.
Gated communities, period.
Yeah.
That's the only reason why we're not there.
Yeah, and there's got to be some type of change or
Right now,
media
Pasco
put out
goes to
there.
Tarpon Springs, and there's a transfer at that point, yeah.
So I just think, cutting off those people in Veterans Village and all the way up when it changes over to Rowan Road is really a disservice to the entire region. So, thank you.
I will remind you that this doesn't show all the local service necessarily. This is what we're defining as the regional network plus regionally significant local service.
I would just like to add that as maybe a potential addition to this system is there's also potential significant regional bike and ped infrastructure. We have the Pinellas Trail, obviously the bridge trail that was recently completed a few years ago, but that's another major network that could potentially have some service.
Access to transit.
Yeah, as a supplement, but also potentially as a primary mode as well. We see that in places like Vancouver, Seattle that have pretty significant bike ped infrastructure. It's not just local.
DC even.
Denver
Yeah,
is
DC,
big.
yeah.
Denver as well.
Yeah, Denver. Denver's a great example. Trail network.
And that's certainly happening as part of the more detailed planning for like Central Avenue BRT
Sure.
and Ford Avenue. But I think I like the idea of a broader policy objective here.
And that may even include station area development, walkability. I know you had some other metrics up from the downtown, the partnership, Tampa Bay partnership, but elements of land use, zoning, scale, all these other elements that sort of support regional transit, I think are sort of important as part of this vision as well.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I want to piggyback on Bob and you and the competitive metrics. I think if you get in bed with all the chambers, they'll tell you how much you can contribute to the different counties, cities, et cetera, because here's how many houses we can add, here's how much retail will follow based on the houses. You're going to get real numbers from these people saying, if you do this,
From
they
the
will
economic
come.
development side.
And that goes, and they'll also tell you what the grassroots are, because that's the people that are feeding them for the houses, so you get two things for one there. And I love your RO, right away. That's where the rubber hits the road, and it says this is not a sham outfit. We do real stuff.
One other thing that I wanted to mention, then maybe we'll get back to our real goal here, is the possibility of using a TIF-type arrangement for funding the stations. I mean, it could be created individually by each city to have a CRA for each station, but it could possibly be done as a statewide funding availability for station development.
Overlay?
That's nice. I like that idea.
I'm just sort of
I agree with the
speculating.
concept, and it certainly has been done. There's no statewide direction on that at this
Right.
point. But it certainly makes sense to acknowledge that opportunity.
That's the only reason why Virgin would come over here, is because they have those.
It's value capture.
Yeah.
It's another reason to go back at the state, because they have been attacking the concept of CRAs in the last few years. So the whole concept is somewhat in danger. But it is an excellent tool. We've benefited in Dunedin enormously from it.
Well, I can tell you, everything we're doing, basically the state legislature charged TBARTA with putting together this plan. So it behooves us now to put that plan. This is it. We're putting together a nice, user-friendly executive summary right now that they'll read, and basically tells them what they asked us to do, and now they need to now you've got to help us figure out how to fund it, because this isn't going anywhere unless we define those funding sources.
So should we talk specifically about the regional transit vision mapping? Are there suggested changes or comments relative to this map? We had one from Kelly.
And that's more of a verification, I think, for Kelly, and I'll just confirm that consistency.
I would just like to reaffirm what I said, that, you know, even though this is a regional transit vision, the local part is hugely important to success of regional transit vision. So the human scale, the design, the walkability, the safety, all of those things that may be under a local agency's purview significantly impact any sort of regional transit. So as part of this, I think there should be at least a piece sort of supporting all the things that make transit successful regionally, and that may include a lot of local efforts.
It's more like transit supportive policy.
Yes, smarter growth, higher density, everything from shaded walkable complete streets to better protected bike networks, that sort of thing, the nuts and bolts parts of it, because that does add up to make something like this ultimately successful.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. When we get to talk about the next subject, that'll probably come up.
Sure.
One real quick question. Is there any way we can throw a bone at Manatee, at Hernando at this time, who are not going to see a return on investment for another 20, 30 years?
Well, I think part of that you're not seeing yet is when I come back to you, you will see that we do have some shorter term horizon projects that we felt would happen within the next 10 years, something that impacts each county. So I think you'll see that when we come back. It's just not going to be the major transit capital investment necessarily in the near term.
Cliff
But it might be express bus in the near term, and then for the longer term, we'd see something more major.
Right.
Cliff and John Mitten, the commissioner, and Cliff, they're not thinking of dropping out. They're.
Yeah, but
I think
it's still a hard sell to the people who are voting for the legislature.
Think about it this way.
That's my thought.
The bus up there is not a it's a lost leader.
Right.
And every so often it says, let's get rid of it, let's get rid of it. They say no,
Right.
because unless we have that, we're not going to be able to connect to whatever else is coming up here. So they've thrown that money into the pot and says, we're here.
I'm impressed with the fact that you went down and talked with each one of the commissioners in Manatee County. And there was a voiceover that didn't get recognized.
Cindy.
Thank you. I'll just stand up so you guys can all see me. I just wanted to jump in and mention, so I'm Cindy Raskin, I'm the Director of Commuter Services. My group is responsible for providing the carpool, vanpool services that we do in the Tampa Bay area. For the first time ever, we have salespeople, account executives that are geographically assigned. So we have a salesperson whose name is Brandon, and I'll bring them to the meeting all of them to the meeting next month so you can meet them. Brandon specifically works in Pasco, Hernando, and Citrus County. He's up there. He comes to the office twice a week for meetings. Other than that, he's out hitting the pavement, talking to businesses, specifically locating businesses that need assistance with getting their people to work. So putting together programs for them. He has been talking with all of those commissioners, meeting with them, asking for input, working with the NPO, working with the economic development groups up there. He's presenting to the Manufacturers Association in Hernando. So we fully recognize that Pasco, Hernando, Citrus, and even though Citrus is not part of TBARTA, it is part of FDOT District 7, so that's why we serve that area. We know that for the commute service program in the past, they've been neglected. So Brandon's up there, he's making great connections. Have any of you all heard of the Best Workplaces for Commuters program that USF manages? It's a national recognition program for people with commute-friendly policies. Brandon just did an application today for a company up there called Paul Aerospace. So he's up there, he is making connections. We are doing things in Pasco and Hernando. Manatee is in District 1 of DOT, so they're not part of our district, but we are talking with them to try to find some way that my team can go down and do some van pool and commuting work in Manatee, but that's still off in the future. The DOT's got to figure out that whole thing. So we are right now have people going into all of these different spaces, working with companies and providing value in the Tampa Bay area right now. So I just wanted to make sure any of you that weren't familiar with that, that you knew that. Next month, My group will be coming, I'll be on your agenda next month to talk to you about our new app that we just rolled out called Commute Tampa Bay, the new branding for the program, some other exciting changes we have. So please come next month so you can learn all about it.
April.
Okay.
April, we're not
April.
here next month.
April, next meeting, not next month. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for doing that, because I raised at one of our earlier meetings a conversation I had with a Manatee County Commissioner who was bemoaning the fact that TBARTA was not providing van or commuter services in Manatee County, so.
There is a vendor that provides commuter services, but they just got the contract from the old vendor, and the old vendor, obviously, they weren't happy with, so they did a bid. But they're still getting up and running. They're doing, they have the same car matching, the carpool and vanpool matching platform that we use. So people right now can match across the counties. And we do have a couple of vanpools that come out of Manatee. But at this point, we just can't go and talk to businesses about the needs for their employees. So we have a couple that go to McDill. I think there's one that goes up to the Clearwater Coast Guard Station, I think comes out of Manatee. And we also have a rep in Hillsborough and one in Pinellas. So we have 3.
So a question for Bill. When you were describing this, you did not reference the vanpool service.
I just mentioned commuter services. It's clear I need to
It's
be
down
more
on the bottom.
expansive on what was included in that.
On the left corner. I thought the same thing, you know,
Yeah.
I'm going, yeah, it's there.
It probably should be highlighted
Okay.
as a bullet someplace along the way, because that's something that can be implemented very quickly.
Right.
And it can affect these other agencies, and it's probably the thing that's going to take cars off the road fastest of anything that we can do. So,
Clearly, we'll include the services that are offered there in the report. I just need to probably emphasize it more in the presentation.
And TD is on there too.
Yeah,
Which
exactly.
you were, whoa, boy.
Yeah.
I have one more comment, and it's something that Bill brought up, is that we're looking at capital investment right now, but operations is far more extensive, and that's where we're lacking in a lot of our agencies currently. Is there a focus on that? How do we remedy that?
It's really both, because, and actually, it's easier to get the capital than it is the operating
Right,
afterwards.
that's what I'm saying.
So when we're talking through funding, there'll be a capital plan and an operating plan and potential revenue sources to target for both.
Thank you.
so I'm looking toward the resolution or the comments that I would make at the next board meeting on our discussion, and I'd like to have some suggestions for that. Now, we could pass a motion to basically endorse this, but need some words to go along with that, so I welcome some suggestions. Otherwise, we're open for a motion.
I'd make a motion to support it, but I don't know what words to put in there, you know, I'm not a wordsmith.
Okay, we'll take that as a motion.
Also with
Yeah, we
a
support-
caveat that we're concerned about the outer regions.
I'll second that.
It's the Bob Show.
What?
This is
It's
one
the
of,
Bob Show.
this is one of the few places where you still have Bobs and Bills.
Yeah.
Plenty of them today,
Canaan
right?
and Baden.
Dave, we haven't heard from you today.
Um,
Do you have any words of wisdom?
Great discussion, touched on a lot of great points. I really like the point you made about the grassroots support being so important. We've seen a number of referendums, and they have done so well, and I think that tells folks who are looking for leadership positions in the communities, whether it be on a local or state level, that, well, maybe transit's not so important in these areas, and so it's not going to be on my priority list when it comes down to some serious legislation like we've talked about here to fund some of these things. So, yeah, that's so important.
Well, if I may, you know, Hillsborough passed that 1 cent transportation tax, and then the legislature is trying to kill it. Here you got grassroots, and the legislature says poo-poo. You know, I mean, that's, as an outsider, I'm looking down there
Yeah,
going,
how frustrating
oh,
is that,
man.
right? Right.
You know?
I'm going to just quickly on your conversation about development and pulling in economic. We're getting a backlash in northern Pinellas County saying we've got nowhere to put development, we've got nowhere to put another economy. So how is this going to benefit us? So that's the
What's the chamber say?
grassroots, right? No, they don't want to hear from the chamber.
Mm.
Do you understand? We're here. We don't want anything.
Yeah, you're
And that's
99% built out.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and you hear the same conversation, Karen, in Hillsborough.
Right.
Because the urban service district is where the services are provided, the water and sewer. And the land use is driven by transportation, Bill, as you know.
Mhm.
So I think if our chairman is looking for some words to help explain passing the motion, I think he may want to consider encouraging the board to seek funding in the form of a regional tax, which is one of the options you put up there, and to, at the same time, support a state, more than just a year-to-year earmark, an ongoing source of funding by the legislature, because the legislature created TBARTA to perform this function. So, Bill, if that helps you, I'll throw those two concepts out. And if it doesn't, don't leave.
I think of this as a body. You know, I've got this, and I got arms and I got legs. Without the arms and legs, body's useless.
Yeah.
Now, that's the analogy. But
Yeah, but when you're talking about somebody who has all the money they need and is living in a gated community for a reason, it's hard to change their minds.
You don't want, not in my backyard.
Right, exactly.
But if you have transit service to the airport, to
They
these
don't want it. They're not
sports,
gonna-
oh, yes.
I'm telling you, they don't want it.
Well, in my community, we
They
do.
do. I want it. But we're talking about a huge portion of North Pinellas and part of Hillsborough County that are out there for a reason. And they don't want to see it, they don't want to pay for it, and that's the backlash that we got. That's how we lost Green Lake Pinellas.
But I do think part of that is also in the awareness and bringing awareness to why TBARTA is a valuable entity.
Right.
And that is in the reducing that congestion, you know, for folks in North Pinellas, it's where I grew up, where my parents still live, is the argument isn't so much we're building this for you, it sometimes is more receptive, is we're building this to get other folks to use it so it's easier for you to
Right.
continue to have your lifestyle.
Well, to
So
have your
Get the
servers
cars out of
serve
the
you
way.
while
Yeah.
you're at the restaurant, you
Right.
know?
So, but again, that to me is more of the conversation of why TBARTA is valuable, what regional transit will do for not just those who ride it, but those who don't ride it, is just as important. So I would say that that's also, I think somebody else mentioned that that's in the top three. I would say that's maybe number one, is what value regional transit brings for everybody, you know, not just the ridership.
Not just the ridership, for the person sitting in the gated community saying, I don't want that here. We need to have that message down pat.
I think Josh just got a marvelous
Yeah,
point
no, I
about
understand that, but
congestion.
that needs to be
If you're 100%
worked
built
on.
out, then you got a problem with congestion. And if somebody tells me they're gonna fix congestion, that's value added, I think.
Well, there's only one way to fix congestion, is to have less cars on the road.
Yeah.
And so the argument for an entity like TBARTA is how do we do that regionally?
Well, if the county above is sending traffic through, you know, because that's the only way they can get there, a la go to the, you know, the sports, then you're taking those cars off the road.
Which is also an equal argument with land use and higher density and making sure that everyone doesn't have to drive to a Publix, that they can potentially walk to a Publix or to school or that sort of thing. So again, that sort of goes back to my other argument about how it's more than just the physical lines on the map. It's more about the
Supportive policy.
The support, right? Because without that, you have a lesser argument for what you're trying to prove as your cause.
It kind of comes into something that I've been thinking about, where the allocation of funds from local transit to regional transit. And there's a conflict between those, because the local folks in a central city would say, well, we should be making the improvement in times so that we can increase density and have our vital central cities. And by spending it on the long line or Hernando or Citrus, there's less return on that investment, even though you have to play that. And that's probably more in the next subject, which we should probably kind of move into.
Sorry.
But-
This is so important.
Yeah.
This is.
Discussion.
But we have a motion on the floor and a second. And are there other discussion points prior to the vote on that motion? All right. Do we still have we still have a quorum. All those in favor of the motion, which was to support the regional transit vision conceptual network with highlighting the TD and the van pool, the importance of grassroots support. I think those were the two things that we wanted to send Bill back with in his message. Aye?
Aye.
Are there any opposed? All right, good.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bill.
So, next is the regional rapid transit. Mr. Pringle. Welcome again. You're a regular. We're going to have to create a frequent flyer program for you, because you're here so often. You would get discounts on coffee or something.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Brian Passaro, Principal Planner with TBARTA. Just doing a quick intro, although I'm pretty sure everyone here knows Scott. We came to the CAC in October, and we gave a presentation. We solicited the CAC's feedback on the purpose of the RRT, and we made adjustments to it based on your comment. That was in October. Then in December, I came and gave you a presentation on the 5 design alternatives that we're carrying forward into 10% design. And so I just asked Scott to come back here today and just kind of get you up to speed on where we are right now in the study. So this is just an informational item, but we just want to keep you in the loop on what's going on with the study. So.
Thank you, Brian. Good afternoon, everybody. Scott Pringle at WSP. Thank you for having me. Just like Brian mentioned, quick update, show you where we are with the Regional Rapid Transit Project. I always like following Bill's presentation of the regional TDP, because that's an important piece of this, because the Regional Rapid Transit is just a project of that larger vision. It is something that obviously TBARTA has been working on, and hopefully we can push that forward as being one of the early projects out of that vision. But again, it's just a single project building towards that ultimate vision. So just like Brian introduced, we are using this slide as our opening slide for every presentation that we're going to do for the Regional Rapid Transit Project ever since we met with you in October, and we're going to continue that through the lifespan of the project. It's a great way to introduce what the project is, what we're trying to do: modern mobility, safe, reliable, fast, and regionally rapid service. And again, thank this group here, because it was your input that really crafted that message that we're going to use throughout the lifespan of the project. You can see some of the text that we had here originally on the left-hand side, and with your input, we amended that purpose statement, especially focusing on modern mobility. I think that was a big part of the conversation we had here with you and the CAC there in October. The CAC also provided a lot of great input on the objectives that support that purpose. You can see them listed here. I think a lot of things you've already been talking about just in the prior conversation with Bill. We talked about mobility, technologies, making sure that we've got the environmental health benefits, supporting local transit, seamless transfers, context, sensitive community stations that gets to that urban scale, good land use planning, walkability, bike and pedestrian access, first and last mile solutions, encouraging private and sector investment, that public-private partnership that we talked about as well, access to jobs. So really, this kind of covers that whole litany of the conversations you guys just had just a few minutes ago. And the way we use these objectives is as we go through milestone 2, 3, 4, and 5, we'll use these objectives as a way to scrutinize these different alternatives and identify and recommend alternatives to carry forward that meet these requirements that you guys have set forth. So again, I appreciate it very much for all your input. We did present this to the TBARTA board and did receive consensus on this. So we, as I mentioned, we are moving full forwards with this purpose and need and those objectives. So we recently wrapped up the first milestone, which was, taking a bit of a step back from the regional transit feasibility plan, that 2-year effort that predated the PD&E. And out of that exercise, we heard very clearly from the public that there were some questions about how much of the corridor should be dedicated and how many stations there should be and what kind of stations. So we kind of tackled that first, and we did identify, and I'm going to show you this, a smaller set of stations that we're focusing on as we move into milestone 2. And, and we defined those corridor options, just like I mentioned, Brian just mentioned, that we're doing right now. So what we're doing right now in milestone 2 is starting to develop our design concepts for those 5 different alternatives. The idea of coming out of milestone 2, selecting either one or 2 of those as our recommended alternative that we then carry forward to a conversation with the federal government, FTA, hopefully asking permission to go into their capital investment grant program, as well as kick off our environmental evaluation of the project effects. So that's milestone 3 that I just talked about. Milestone 2, we're wrapping up here. You're going to see some of the information start rolling out even as soon as next month, really carrying through until May. And then, working NEPA and all the environmental evaluations, that takes quite a bit of time. There's a lot of work that needs to be done there. So we're looking at fall, winter of this year before we're completed with milestone 3, and then working our way towards 3% design. And ultimately, the goal is to have a grant application to FTA to get some of those federal funds to build the project. So I talked about, focusing on the station areas. We had 21 stations along this 41-mile corridor from St. Pete all the way up to Wesley Chapel. We heard from the public a lot of conversations that, do we need that many stations? And the stations that we do want to move forward, what do they actually look like? How does that actually work? So we first tackled the number of stations, and we did a detailed evaluation, technical evaluation. We looked at cost benefit. We looked at ridership. We looked at the physical feasibility, the community context, the environmental issues that each one of these station areas. And now we've brought forth and prioritized 13 stations that move forward instead of the 21. You can see them listed here. The only difference in color is these lighter blue and white circles are those intermodal centers, just like Bill mentioned. But these are the 13. One nuance to that is we're still trying to identify the appropriate solution for the Tampa and Seminole Heights area. We've got a couple of different options, so that's why it's more of less of a circle, more of an oval, as it were, because we're looking at a couple different locations in that area.
Scott, in that, it says 62nd Avenue and 22nd Avenue.
22nd Avenue was one of the first of the 21 total stations. We met with land use staff and the transit agency staff, and we had a series of different internal committees.
So you moved from 22nd to 62nd?
Yeah, that was actually forward Pinellas, and Pinellas County was really interested in that. The conversation was that 21st is pretty close to downtown, and we already had service both effectively around Tropicana Field and 4th Street. And their concern was that you would miss big parts of Pinellas County if you went from 21st all the way up to Gateway. So they were looking for something more in between to serve Pinellas Park.
I just wanted to know what was why the parentheses there. and you've answered that
Oh,
question.
sorry.
So-
Yeah. No, 22nd is actually, it's a great station. It's a station that produces very well. The densities are there, that walkability is there that we talked about. And depending upon how we get in and out of downtown St. Pete, 22nd still may be a viable station, so we're kind of leaving it in play, not completely removed. That's why it's still in parentheses. So we have the 13 stations that we're moving forward with, but the biggest work that we're focused on right now is working with all the roadway designers at FDOT and TB Next to really identify exactly how are we going to get the space for BRT service in the interstate. Making sure that we're completely consistent with what FDOT's plans are for modernizing the interstate, seeing how this project fits in. So we have 5 alternatives that we're working on now, but there are a couple of terminology items that I want to first address. These are really important, and they are very nuanced. Unfortunately, even BRT is not black and white. There's different grays of BRT as well. So what we're doing is providing that sort of definition of the different elements. So currently, in the department's plans for modernizing the I-275 corridor or TB Next, they are making some provisions for what they call bus on shoulder. So this is where they've left enough space on the shoulder, and they're actually investing in full-depth asphalt in those shoulders so that a transit vehicle can use that. However, as the state legislation is, the law is today, that has to be tied to the travel speed of the general purpose traffic. So if traffic, regular traffic on the interstate is going 35 miles per hour or slower, then a transit vehicle is allowed to get into that hardened shoulder and go a little bit faster than the bottleneck, essentially. So that's one aspect of dealing with BRT in an interstate environment. However, that particular definition does not meet the federal requirements for that grant program. Because for FTA, they want to see a dedicated BRT corridor. That means that it's not tied to speed, but it's available at the very least during the big portions of the peak periods, in the morning and in the evening, ideally all day. So it cannot be tied to the speed of general purpose. It can be in the exact same physical space. It's just the when it operates. It can't be tied to the speed of general purpose. It has to be something that's allowed for vast majorities of the day. That meets that federal requirement. So that's a nuance that I want to call out because it does impact how we're looking at these different 5 alternatives. In between, like I said, different shades of gray. There's also the business access and transit lane, or BAT lane as it's affectionately called. That's what Central Avenue is doing, connecting downtown St. Pete to the beaches, in which vehicles are allowed to enter into the BRT lane only for the purposes of turning to get access to a business or to a resident. They are not allowed to travel along that lane as a throughput movement. It can only turn from that. So, there's different variations, but what we're looking at for this project is that dedicated freeway BRT, which provides a space for that transit service that's not interrupted by local traffic or traffic in the general purpose lanes, and that it is there for vast majorities of the day.
Scott, Mr. Chair. So in the BAT lane, is that similar to what's on US 19 in Pasco? Like how you have to turn to get into the businesses, or is this an additional lane? Are you taking away a lane?
So it really depends on the project. So the best example we have here, of course, is what PSTA is doing with Central Avenue BRT. They are actually removing some of the on-street parking and narrowing lane widths to accommodate this new lane for the BRT. Okay. But what happens is, that BRT is running on that outside lane, and there are a number of homes and businesses along Central Avenue, or First Avenue North and South, and what this does is allow people to still turn into those businesses and not be cut off.
Okay.
So, there are examples nationally where a lane is taken and turned into a BAT lane, so you can still turn from that if you're an automobile, but you can't use it to drive straight
Can't
through.
go straight
Yeah.
through the
So that's the distinction between the two. So we have the 5 alternatives that Brian mentioned. I'm going to go through them again. Our no build is basically what's being included already as it stands as part of TB Next. So this is TB Next without the Regional Rapid Transit Project, without TBARTA's project in play. And you can see the orange here is that bus on shoulder that I mentioned before. So this is what we're kind of using as our baseline, our no build, sort of our starting point for the Regional Rapid Transit. We have to have sort of that point of comparison of with and without the project, so that as we're doing our environmental work, we can determine what the true impacts or effects of our project are to the community.
Scott, what does the dash line mean in a couple locations?
So this dash lane here is showing that we are still intending to look at providing connectivity, direct connectivity to the airport. So the idea is that in the way we develop our operations, we may have 1 or 2 routes an hour that deviate from the core path and make that connection to the airport, so people get direct connections to the Conrack facility that the airport just built. This is the connection to the Intermodal Center in the Greater Gateway. Fort Pinellas put out their Gateway Master Plan, in which the potential location for an Intermodal Center was identified. FDOT was working with them closely in identifying that. It's more in the Carillon area, which is not next to the interstate. So we show the dotted lines because obviously we want to get connectivity to Carillon and Gateway. We're just not sure exactly how we're going to accomplish that yet. So this is our no build, this is our baseline, this is our starting point. You can see obviously there's very little dedicated lanes, only 3% in terms of what FTA considers dedicated. And really that all occurs down here on Central Avenue, where we're actually using the Central Avenue, the First Avenue North and South corridor, that BAT lane. That does meet FTA criteria for a dedicated lane. So I mentioned that comment, this alone, what TB Next has provided, that starting point, that baseline, is not eligible for FTA capital investment grant dollars. So our first alternative, alternative 1, is what we call our sort of transit systems management. It's the best you can do with the least amount of money. So really the focus here is very little investment on the alignment itself. However, the difference between the no build and this first alternative is that we would recommend investment at station areas, those 13 station areas along the corridor. So that's the difference there. Again, this alternative would not be eligible for those FTA dollars. And then alternative 2, this is the recommendation that came out of the Regional Transit Feasibility Plan. And now in the dark purple is where you can see that freeway dedicated BRT lane recommendation. So in the alternative 2, or the RTFP recommendation, we have dedicated from St. Pete up to Greater Gateway. At that point, the concept was to merge with the toll traffic that's going across the Howard Franklin Bridge. So it would be mixed with other automobiles in that tolled environment until we got to West Shore, which would be dedicated again, until we get to the downtown interchange, in which we'd be getting out of the interstate anyways to get connection to downtown Tampa. And then dedicated north of downtown Tampa up to USF, and then the 2 major interchanges in Pasco, which there's quite a bit of backup in traffic at 54 and 56, so getting dedicated space to get outside those traffic areas. That brings us up to a total of 60% dedicated for the entire 41-mile corridor. The federal government requirement is 50%. So this alternative would be eligible for those federal capital investment grant dollars. Coming out of the RTFP, I mentioned, people are asking the question about, where's it dedicated, how much of it should be dedicated. That was a big part of the conversation. And it's pretty clear if you look at this concept, there are 2 big holes. Going across the Howard Franklin Bridge and going from basically the university area up into about Pasco County line, where we'd be in mixed traffic again. So our following alternatives 3, 4, and 5, are addressing those gaps. Bottom line, it's very simple. We first have an alternative that fills in the gap into connection from University up to Pasco with a dedicated lane all the way up into and through Pasco up to State Route 54. Alternative 4 is evaluating a dedicated lane across the Howard Franklin Bridge. And then alternative 5, and you can see the difference in that percentage of dedicated lanes, how much that jumps. So we had another 20% just by adding Pasco. Just by adding Howard Franklin, we had another 25% dedicated. And then, of course, our last alternative is nearly 100% dedicated. It's not a completely 100% because, like I said, we're getting out and avoiding the downtown interchange. But this alternative evaluates the entire corridor. So what we're working on now is devising and developing design concepts for the running way that matches each one of these 5 alternatives. And we're looking at both inside running and outside running. So inside running, if you could imagine yourself going along the interstate, this is the BRT lane, the dedicated lane, would be to your right in the median. The outside running, of course, on the opposite side, on your left-hand side, running on that shoulder. There are 2 fundamental issues that we're working through right now with our design team, and it's simple that on the inside, we get a lot of speed. We don't have a lot of interference from automobiles, which is a great advantage. However, when we get to a station area, we either have to have a platform that somehow fits in that median, or we have to come out of the interstate to make a connection either adjacent to the interstate or into the neighborhood. That's expensive, bottom line. When we look on the outside, we don't have the cost there. The flexibility to get in and out of the interstate is so much easier from a design standpoint. We can either use the existing interchanges, or we can actually just sort of slip out of the right-of-way and create our own slips on and off. It's just, we have a lot more flexibility when we're on the outside, a lot less cost because we don't have to have a direct access ramp or that connection from the inside. But on the outside, what we're dealing with is safety and operations, because there are times where that vehicle is going to pass through an on-ramp or an off-ramp, and we are looking at design solutions of how traffic would mix or cross each other. So people getting off in an interchange, how would they interact with that vehicle, that transit vehicle, as it's passing through the interchange itself? We have a couple of really good design solutions that we're working on right now to address that. We've had great interaction and significant coordination with FDOT and the TBNX team. I think we're slowly getting them to a place where they're comfortable and letting us play in their sandbox. And so, that's what we're going to continue working on. We're going to develop those alignment concepts for these 5 alternatives, and we're going to bring forward a conversation on, how well each one of those perform, what are the costs associated with each one of these 5 alternatives, outside, inside running. And we'll bring that back to you at the conclusion of this milestone 2.
Scott, was there a consideration to have mixed?
Yeah, it's actually going to be, the truth of the matter is there are some places it will be mixed.
Right.
There are some places along the corridor where we really don't have an inside running option. A great example is St. Pete up to the Gandy. FDOT is currently looking at potentially a toll lane that would consume that median that's already there today. So we almost have to be outside. Although from our design team standpoint, that's the preference, is to be outside. Whereas between West Shore and downtown Tampa, there's no room to be outside because there are so many interchanges. We are actually kind of forced to be on the inside. The question from West Shore to downtown Tampa is, are we creating our own separated guideway from West Shore to downtown Tampa, or are we using the shoulders of the new reconfigured, and there's pros and cons to both, and costs to both. So those are the things we're evaluating. Now, when we get from Tampa north to USF, we actually have both inside and outside options available to us. So we're evaluating that moving forward, all within the existing right-of-way, all using the shoulders that are already out there, already planned. In most cases, we're talking about adding, between 2 to 4 feet maximum of additional asphalt on the shoulders to accommodate this BRT vehicle, which would still allow for a shoulder, approximately about a 4-foot shoulder to allow for disabled vehicles and drainage during rain events, and at least a 12-foot transit lane in that. So, we have some great opportunities, and we can do it all within what's already available to us within the interstate, which is fantastic. So the alignment itself, we're not really looking at any new need for right-of-way at all. It's all what's already publicly owned by the state. Stations, we are going to have a conversation about parcels and property, right? So that's our next big event that we're ramping up for right now. We will be sending out invitations very soon to what we call our station charrettes, which will be the first 2 weeks of March. Everyone here will get an invitation to these events. The goal of this event is that, we want to make sure that we continue to have the opportunity for the communities to weigh in on these station areas, tell us what's appropriate from a context-sensitive standpoint, making sure that we have stations that fit well into the fabric of these different neighborhoods. And of course, it allows the public to have greater ownership or greater input into the public moving forward. It's a 3-hour event, so it's not for the faint of heart. It is a very interactive event. I have done these before. It looks daunting when you see that length of time, but I'm telling you, once you sit down, you'd be surprised how fast the day goes, because it's very interactive, it's very quick, it's very fast moving. And what we do is we'll have invitations, so it's open to the general public, everyone can participate. But we do have folks who are going to be invited to join us at these small group tables. So we'll have a portion of the day where there are a number of different questions and exercises that are geared towards the entire audience, which is everything from, we're looking at, asking people what type of community or what type of station typology is this particular area. So for example, if we're in the Bears station area, what type of station typology is this? Is it an urban station type? Is it a suburban station type? And we're actually using some information that the USF School of Architecture developed, their best practices, as sort of our reference point for that, and developing those typologies. And then, but then we get into the nitty-gritty of it, and we sit down at these tables, and we ask people to start telling us, what are the amenities that should be provided at each one of these stations? What should it look like? How should we get access to it? What are some potentially good locations for these different stations? And everyone at the table is going to be working with a moderator and an artist, and you get to roll up your sleeves and design a station yourself. And each table gets to design their own concept, their own vision, and then we actually have each table present the concepts back to the entire room, and we vote on them and come up with some preferred sort of ideas of how we move that forward. So the event itself is not necessarily designed to reach a large number of the public. It's really designed to make sure that we have the folks sitting at the table that can really start illustrating the appropriate vision for each one of these station areas, so that we can use it to guide the design of the stations and eventually carry that water out to the larger public as we move forward with the project.
Scott, before you,
Yeah.
is the intent one charrette for all 13
No.
station locations?
No.
or-
So we have 8 charrettes scheduled those first 2 weeks of March, or 6 in the first 2 weeks of March. We have 8 total. We are not doing the intermodal centers. So the one at West Shore, downtown Tampa, we are focusing on stations like 62nd, Himes, the Tampa, Seminole Heights area, the Waters, Bird Station area, Bears I mentioned, and then 54 in Pasco County. In Pasco. Yeah.
Are any of those stations park and ride?
So that'll be up to the group.
Okay.
We've had a lot of conversations about, how much parking should be available at these station areas, if any at all. And, for example, Commissioner Kemp and I have had quite a few conversations about this. It's one of her concerns. And this is where we get to ask that question and have the community tell us, no parking here. Okay, fine, no parking. And then like I said, that's how we inform the design of the stations. Now, I would imagine maybe for example, the station in Pasco on 54, I would imagine that parking is probably an appropriate amenity for that particular station. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. You know, and that's why it's so important to have this sort of charrette experience so that people can really define what the context is for each one of these station areas, knowing that they're all unique. And we're not trying to, you know, create this sort of peanut butter approach. We want, you know, unique solutions for each one of these communities. So like I talked about, we're going to talk about the typologies. These are those typologies from Terrence Sabia at USF that best practices. We're going to talk about placement of this actual station itself, and also the vision, the amenities that I just talked about. And we'll have more information in the invite that will be forthcoming very soon with dates. If you don't mind, start penciling in. It is the first 2 full weeks of March is what we're shooting for. So with that, Mr. Chair, I conclude my presentation. I'll take any questions.
Questions, comments? I have one brief comment that I'm reminded of green light when we got into all this detail of how it would work and what it would look like.
Yeah.
We kind of lost sight, or people forgot why they were traveling on this journey. That the objectives that you showed us at the very beginning. I think it's really important to keep re-emphasizing that.
Okay.
Especially at the charrettes. Why you're there, and don't get so involved in designing a station.
Yeah. Well, that's the fun
It's got to
part,
be
but yeah.
for that bigger goal.
Agreed. Will do.
Well, this is not an action item.
Correct.
But I think Scott would appreciate some involvement in the charrettes coming out. Oh, sorry.
I just had a quick question. Again, I know it's pretty far along, but I was just curious, did part of your initial analysis look at running in a dedicated lane along Florida Ave, since they're looking at that for the BRT solution there, similar to how you're doing with the Bat Lane and on Central Ave? Was that ever sort of considered as, jumping off the interstate and running on Florida or something like that?
So the concept as it stands now is those two projects complement each other. And the presence of Hart's project on Florida Avenue provides this scenario in which we can have fewer regional stops, because that arterial BRT will be the connection point that distributes the trips up and down Florida. That area from Florida or all the way over to Nebraska and really beyond is the heaviest traveled transit travel market in our entire region. So it needs a lot of service. And the way we've always been looking at it, there's good local service there today. You got Metro Rapid as well. But we need something for those medium-length trips, which is that arterial BRT, which is an excellent solution for that. And then, but that regional connectivity can then be provided by this regional concept on the
So
interstate.
I think it'd be good to maybe have a slide or two talking about that corridor specifically, because again, there's a lot rides on the dedicated lane, right? And so you've got a shift potentially around Barris Avenue, and so that's sort of a lot of density in that area and how it's impacted. Obviously, there was a lot of impact with TBX and TBNext and a lot of community engagement in that area, so they've got a pretty big stake in this project. So, I mean, I would just like to see a little bit more about what's being proposed for Florida Ave, what this project is going to do, what Metro Rapid may do, or Number One may do as a complement of services, and not necessarily one versus the other
Agreed.
Because it's a big part of the picture, what you just said.
Agreed.
Local, medium, long-range trips, right? How they all play together, why one's where it is, that sort of thing. So just from a clarity and conversational standpoint, because I've done a lot of these charrettes in this area, it would be very, I think, valuable to sort of paint that picture like Bill was saying.
Especially for the charrettes, right? Okay, yeah, absolutely. No, it's a good idea. Thank you.
And please go to the charrettes. I'm a Florida Center alum, so they're very important.
They're fun, too.
Other comments, questions?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, John.
New business or committee discussions? Anything? We're kind of at our witching hour. Items to report to the board, we have the one motion with the, on the transit plan, with the supplemental comments on the transit disadvantage and the van pool, and the importance of grassroots support. Bob, did you have a question?
I just, one thing, I really like what you said about TIP financing. What you had mentioned there. Is it possible that we could come back and touch on that as a possible funding source for activities in the future?
So are you suggesting?
Sort of an exploration of TIF and other possible funding sources. A county like Manatee, which has astronomical growth, could really, really benefit from a TIF type of financing.
So are you suggesting that as part of the supporting comments to our motion, we've included there, or you were talking about future meetings?
Things?
Okay. Well, that was the one thing I had penciled in on my agenda for the next item. So, other business, the next meeting will be here again on April 15th. Tax day, huh? Future meeting subjects, we'll put the TIF on as a potential future meeting subject. Bob?
Just one comment. Do we want to follow up on Bill's comment about TBARTA possibly getting involved in purchasing right away for the locals?
That would be related to the motion, or is that a?
No, it's just a separate.
Future.
Or it could be a future. I think.
Or staff report of some kind.
Pardon?
Or staff report of some kind.
You know, how would you go about that? You know, it has to be a grant, right?
Yeah.
So that's another future meeting subject.
Thank you. Thank you.
Other
Mr. Chairman.
comments? Well, I'm very heartened by the fact that we had a quorum, and the people that are around this table are the people that are here on a regular basis. You are extremely important to this this committee. The fact that you're here, I think we need to pass on to David or somebody, or the board, that we need to have more of the members participate in order to continue to be a viable organization.
They did request meeting summaries from what's going on here at the CAC committee, because they have been informed that the attendance is not that great. So they are being informed about, like, just highlights about what's happening here and the attendance.
Okay, so they're getting that in addition to what we do.
Vacancies on the list.
So what is the vacancy
do.
rate in filled seats, and what is the board composition, or committee composition?
I think we did.
We have Hernando as vacant, and I know that Commissioner Mitten is working on that. He told me that by the end of this quarter, he should have that spot filled for the MPO. Let's see. Or no, that's his vote, sorry.
His
And we still have a
appointment.
vacancy for the MPO as well. And it just seems like, we do see the same faces over and over again. It's just that people just choose not to come. And we have informed, the people that did appoint them of their attendance, so it's known.
Leonard sometimes participates by phone.
That's all you can do.
Ask them why they don't come.
Yeah, it's.
It's an hour and a half drive for me.
Can we make note of the people that don't show up?
It's on all the meetings.
I know it's on all the meetings, but I think we need to discuss who they're representing and what they're representing.
Also, you can call in, but you don't count toward a quorum.
Right, but the
So that
discussion
really
is
is-
there with the call-in too. They can discuss. That's what we're missing, is the
Right.
discussion.
That would be something for Bill to bring up when he comes to the board meeting, if that's something that you want to further, like we don't have any
Yeah.
control over that, that would be something, a bigger conversation.
In preparation for that, could staff put together just a little Excel spreadsheet that would list meeting dates and?
How far back do you want that to go?
Just
How
to-
far back?
How far back do you want that to go?
2 years.
Yeah, well, I think 2 years.
Well, I've
is-
only been here since January of last year, so
Well,
I only feel comfortable putting that in there because the records, unfortunately, things weren't kept very properly. So
Can we do
I
it
can only
from the
vouch till
minutes?
last January.
Could we do it from the minutes, or?
Yeah, you do it for, you pull from the minutes.
It's a matter of time. You know, I have a lot of projects on my plate, so.
If you just have 1 year, though, I mean,
Yeah,
back to
I mean, I
last
think 1 year
January,
should
would at
be
least
pretty
show
sufficient.
a current
12 months.
record.
Start
Yeah.
something, right?
You know, it's current.
Just start.
And then you can say, well, maybe the year before that person missed even more, so.
Yeah.
Do our bylaws specify a certain amount of times that you're allowed to miss?
Yes,
You need an excuse or something
I'm
like
pretty
that.
sure they do.
I mean,
With the new-
ours do
with the
for
new
tons of
organization?
stuff, but-
For our CAC MPO, I mean,
I'm
every
not-
year
I'm not
there's
sure
a
about
that.
sheet on one of the meetings,
They
absentees,
show up.
and then you know, it's
Three times.
three unexcused.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Courtesy,
You
but nothing
know.
else.
And we usually send
That's
out
not how we
letters,
say it,
you know,
unfortunately.
reminding them, hey, you missed 2. If you miss 1 more, we're gonna have to replace you. And that usually came from the chair. Sorry. Well, It's usually how we did it. Ask.
So I will get you the spreadsheet.
Yeah.
I'm out Friday, but I can give it to you by Tuesday morning, so you'll have it ahead of time.
Are you working Monday?
No, we're closed on Monday.
Okay, that's what I'm asking. Yeah.
Oh, great, it's a long weekend,
That must be nice.
So, I mean, just looking, Walter O'Rourke from Polk County, I don't think he's very regular. Tyler Hudson from the city of Tampa is not, I don't remember seeing him on a regular basis. Travis Norton is usually here.
He's been here.
He's been here.
And Casimir Rowski.
Yeah, we don't even know how to say his name, so obviously he hasn't been
Oh,
here.
he's been here once.
I think he was here
Once.
one time, because I was
Yeah.
surprised.
That's the pull-up.
We're gonna scratch that from the minutes.
Turn off the recording.
Can we adjourn real quick?
I know, I'm sorry.
All right, well, is there anything else that needs to come to the committee? If not, we're adjourned.
Thank
Thank
you.
you all for
Thank
coming.
you, Mr. Chairman.
Happy Valentine's Day, everybody.
Yeah. Ooh.
Have a good long weekend.
Goodbye.
Drive back safely, drive back safely, Sarah.
Yeah, it's a double hit. you know?